It began with static. A flicker across the screen, a moment of digital interference, easily dismissed on first glance. Sarah Tolland didn't give it much thought at first. After all, their wildlife cameras glitched all the time. Dust in the lens, a moth passing too close, battery hiccups. But something about the way the interference moved across the screen, like it wasn't coming from the technology but from something in front of it, made her pause. She rewound the footage again. The cameras had been placed as part of a long-running wildlife tracking study deep in the forests of northeastern Washington. Rugged, unspoiled, and full of life that hadn't been studied in decades. Sarah, the project's lead biologist, had been going over footage from Camera 11, a remote unit placed about 2 miles beyond the usual trail. It was set to record motion-triggered clips. Owls, deer, foxes, even the occasional black bear had been caught in sharp definition, their activities undisturbed by the invisible lens. But last night was different. The camera had triggered at exactly 2:16 a.m. The first thing she noticed was the sound, something none of the other cameras had ever picked up before. It wasn't supposed to record audio. And yet, the clip had a low, humming tone playing faintly in the background. It wasn't wind. It wasn't an animal. It was almost mechanical. She leaned forward. The clip was only 12 seconds long. The trees in the frame looked normal at first, nothing unusual, just the jagged silhouettes of pine and spruce under moonlight. But then, toward the edge of the right-hand corner, a figure moved, or rather, shimmered, like a ripple across the air, as if reality itself had been disturbed. She paused it. The figure was tall. Very tall. Nearly 7 feet, maybe more. But it didn't move like a person or an animal. It sort of glided. Its limbs were wrong. Longer than they should be. There was no face visible, just darkness. Its form pulsed ever so slightly, like it was fighting to stay in one shape. Sarah sat back in her chair. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't anything that belonged out there. She called James from down the hall, one of the other researchers on the project. "You need to see this." He trudged in with a mug of stale coffee, annoyed to be pulled away from his own dataset. But once he saw the footage, his tone changed. He leaned in without a word and scrubbed the timeline back and forth. "What is that?" he murmured. "No clue. But it's real. The trees bend as it passes. It casts a shadow." James shook his head. "Could be some glitch. A reflection of something." "No," Sarah whispered. It looked at the camera. For a split second. "Watch, frame 306. They zoomed in, pixel by pixel. And there it was, 2 hollow, pitch-black eyes locking directly with the lens. As if it knew they were watching. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Her apartment, located in the ranger station's staff housing complex, was usually comfortingly quiet. Crickets, owls, wind through the trees. But now, every creak of the floorboard made her skin crawl. Every shadow in the corner of her vision seemed to move. She kept seeing those eyes. Empty. Unblinking. Reflecting nothing. By morning, she'd made a decision. They had to go to the camera site. It wasn't unusual for Sarah and her team to hike out to the cameras. Maintenance runs were part of the job. But something about this trip felt different. Heavy. The moment they entered the woods, everything seemed still. The birds were silent. The wind was absent. Even the air felt heavier, like it was thicker somehow. James joined her, along with Laura and Derek, 2 grad students helping with the data collection that summer. None of them had seen the footage yet. Sarah had decided not to show it. Not yet. She wanted to see the site for herself first. They hiked for almost 2 hours through dense undergrowth, following the GPS markers and faded orange flags they'd tied to trees weeks earlier. The forest grew darker the deeper they went. Shadows lingered longer than they should have. The air was cooler here. Moist. It smelled like moss, rotting bark, and something else. Something metallic. "Almost there," Sarah said, more to herself than the others. They reached Camera 11 around noon. It was still mounted to the tree, aimed precisely where she remembered. Nothing had disturbed it. Except, there were no tracks. No signs of any animals nearby. Not even deer scat, which was usually everywhere in this part of the forest. "Let's check the area," she said. Derek circled left, Laura to the right. James crouched beside the tree and opened the camera casing. "Batteries full. SD card looks good. But there's—" He stopped mid-sentence. "What?" Sarah asked. "Something weird on the lens." He stepped back, and Sarah leaned in. There was a faint smudge right in the center, circular, like condensation. But when she touched it, it was dry. Cold. Too cold. Suddenly, Laura called out. Guys." They turned to see her standing a few feet into the trees, staring down at something on the ground. Sarah jogged over. It was a print. Not an animal track. Not a boot. It was something else. For elongated impressions, each at least a foot long, deep in the earth. No heel. No claw. Almost like a hand, but stretched beyond proportion. And there were more, leading off into the trees, curving slightly toward the north. "Is this a prank?" Derek asked nervously. Sarah shook her head. "No one even knows where this camera is but us." They followed the tracks in silence, moving slowly, their boots crunching on twigs and moss. The prints seemed to shimmer at their edges, like the earth was struggling to hold their shape. After maybe 40 feet they just stopped. No fade out. No scatter. Just stopped, in the middle of a small clearing where the sunlight barely touched the mossy floor. And in the center of the clearing, something lay half buried. It was metallic. Round. About the size of a melon. They dug it out carefully, revealing a smooth, jet-black sphere with no markings, except for a faint circular ridge on its surface, like a sealed seam. "What the hell is this?" James asked. "No clue," Sarah whispered. "But we're taking it back." Back at the lab, Sarah placed the sphere on the metal table in the quarantine chamber used for handling unknown biological samples. It didn't respond to touch, temperature, or magnets. When they tried to X-ray it, the machine failed to generate an image. As if the sphere absorbed the rays entirely. That night, Sarah reviewed the rest of Camera 11's footage. The clip from 2:16 a.m. wasn't the only one. There were 6 more. Each time, the creature drew a little closer. In one, it was standing in the background, its arms too long, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. In another, it moved across the frame at inhuman speed, faster than the camera could track. Just a blur of black static. But in the last one, time-stamped 3:43 a.m., the camera didn't trigger due to motion. It turned on by itself. There was no animal. No wind. Just the same humming static. And a single frame of the creature pressed directly against the lens, as if trying to crawl through. Sarah stopped the video. Her skin prickled. The hairs on her neck stood up. She didn't remember installing audio capabilities on these cameras. She didn't remember seeing that timestamp the first time either. She sat back in her chair and looked across the room to the metal table. The sphere was no longer there. The metal table was empty. Sarah froze in place, her breath caught halfway between inhale and panic. Her eyes flicked to the security monitor above the door, expecting perhaps a malfunction, a prank, anything to explain why a smooth, impenetrable black sphere had vanished from a sealed lab room with no windows, no vents, and no motion alerts. "James!" she called out, voice tight, brittle. "Did you move the object?" He walked in from the hallway, still holding a steaming cup of coffee and looking tired. "No." "Why?" She stepped aside. "It's gone." He blinked, looked at the table, then set the cup down slowly. "You're messing with me. I wish I were." Together they checked the chamber's security logs. Nothing. Not a single beep. The system was supposed to notify them of any opening of the chamber door or any movement inside it. But the logs were clean, empty between the moment Sarah had sealed the room and now. "What about the footage?" James asked. She pulled up the feed from the interior camera mounted above the table. At first, everything looked normal. The black sphere sat motionless for hours. But around 3:12 a.m., the footage blurred slightly, a faint static ripple cutting horizontally across the screen, almost like a videotape stuttering. Then, for 4 frames, less than a second, the video blacked out completely. When it returned, the sphere was gone. Sarah's stomach twisted. No sign of anything entering or leaving. No motion, no heat signature, nothing. "That's not possible," James whispered. "It's just not." He stopped, because something new had appeared on screen. In the far corner of the chamber, just behind where the sphere had been, a shadow flickered. A tall, vaguely humanoid outline. It had not been there before. It did not move. It just stood. And then it was gone. James took a step back from the monitor. "That's the thing from the forest." Sarah said nothing. Her mouth was dry. Her thoughts were spiraling. The rational part of her brain scrambled to create a reasonable theory. Hallucination. Prank. Exposure to environmental toxins. But nothing added up. The footage from camera 11. The handprint tracks. The distorted figure. The impossible object. And now this. The pattern was escalating. By midday, word had quietly spread through the lab about the missing object. The other researchers avoided the topic directly, but Sarah could feel the tension in every glance. Every conversation cut short when she walked into the room. The staff didn't need to see the footage to know something was wrong. The forest hadn't felt right in weeks. And now, the equipment itself was starting to act strange. Monitors flickered without cause. Batteries drained twice as fast as usual. Radios picked up garbled transmissions, words spoken in no known language. And the other cameras were showing signs of corruption. Not just camera 11. Camera 3, placed near a freshwater stream 2 miles west, had started displaying color bleeding and pixel distortion, signs usually caused by extreme cold or water damage. But the weather had been mild. The camera was fully operational. Camera 7 showed shapes in the trees. Not animals, not people. Just shapes. Outlines. Always standing still. Always in the corners of the frame. And then there was camera 14, the most recent to show anomalies. At first, it had simply recorded fewer animals than usual. Then none at all. Then static. And finally, 3 nights ago, a figure moving in the background. Just like the first one. Long limbs, stuttering motion, a head that turned too far. Something was spreading. Sarah called an emergency meeting that afternoon in the research facility's main conference room. Half the staff looked confused, the other half concerned. Most hadn't been to the northern forest in weeks. They didn't know what was going on. Or didn't want to. She stood at the front, back straight, face pale. "I know there's been a lot of speculation about the anomalies in the camera data. I've reviewed the footage from several sites and it's clear we're dealing with something unknown. Possibly a new species or phenomenon. I can't explain it yet, but I need a small team to return with me to camera 11's location." A heavy silence followed. A few eyes darted across the room. Then Derek raised his hand. "I'll go." Laura followed. "Me too." James nodded. Sarah felt a mix of gratitude and dread. "Good. We leave at dawn." That night, Sarah barely slept. The wind howled outside her cabin window, rattling the thin glass panes. Somewhere in the forest, something was watching them. It had seen their cameras. It had come to the lab. And it had taken back whatever they'd found. Her dreams were plagued by images of the black sphere, floating in her room, hovering inches above her chest, vibrating with a low hum. And in those dreams, she couldn't move. Couldn't scream. Could only watch as the sphere split open slowly, revealing a twisting interior of shadows and limbs and blinking eyes. She woke in a cold sweat. 3:12 a.m. The exact time the object disappeared from the lab. The next morning, the 4 of them set out for the forest with heavier gear. Heat scanners, backup batteries, high-frequency audio monitors, and satellite comms. They weren't going blind this time. They wanted data, solid, objective data. As they hiked, the mood was subdued. The woods were still, too still. No birds, no insects. Even their footsteps sounded muted, as if the ground were muffling them. The deeper they went, the worse it became. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. Trees seemed subtly different, twisted, as if trying to grow away from something unseen. After 2 hours, they reached camera 11. But something was wrong. The tree the camera had been mounted to had collapsed, split cleanly down the middle as though sliced by a massive blade. The camera lay smashed on the forest floor, its casing cracked, its lens shattered. No animal could have done that. Not cleanly. Not with that kind of force. James knelt beside it. Whatever this thing is, it knows we're watching. Derek pointed to the dirt nearby. More tracks. Long, finger-like impressions. But this time, they weren't walking away. They formed a complete circle around where the tree had stood, almost ritualistic. And in the center of the circle, a new object. Not a sphere. A cube. Smooth, black, matte-surfaced like the first, but with shallow grooves running along its edges. Sarah stepped closer. The grooves weren't random, they formed symbols. Angular, sharp, like glyphs from an unknown language. Derek reached out, but Sarah stopped him. "Don't touch it. We need to analyze it," he argued. "I said don't." Then the humming started again. Low. Vibrating through the ground. The cube pulsed once, just once, and the forest seemed to shudder. They all stepped back, instinctively drawing closer together. Then the audio monitor clipped to Laura's vest squealed with white noise, and then something else. A voice. Not human. Not anything that should have been possible. A long, garbled string of tones that echoed like speech filtered through broken speakers. Then silence. The cube stopped pulsing. Laura's face had gone pale. Did anyone else hear that? James was shaking. It spoke. I think it spoke. "Backpack it," Sarah said. "We're taking it with us. But don't touch it directly. Use gloves. Wrap it tight." She didn't know why she felt so certain that touching it directly would do something worse. But her gut screamed it. The hike back was slower. The woods felt different now. Pressurized. Like they were being pulled toward something they couldn't see. Each step felt heavier. The shadows deeper. James swore he saw a figure behind a tree, twice. Laura kept glancing over her shoulder. Even Derek, the most skeptical of the group, had gone quiet. When they finally emerged from the tree line and saw the research station on the ridge, the whole group seemed to exhale at once. Sarah almost believed they'd made it out clean. Until they got back to the lab. The power was out. The entire facility was dead. Doors ajar. Lights off. Radios silent. They approached cautiously, weapons ready. Not that any of them knew what good a flare gun or tranquilizer would do against something that could disappear from a locked room without a trace. Inside, it was colder than it should have been. Like a freezer door left open too long. In the hallway leading to the lab, muddy footprints trailed across the floor. Long, thin. Not human. James whispered. We weren't the only ones in the forest today. At the end of the hallway, on the wall just outside the quarantine chamber, someone, or something, had scrawled a symbol. The same angular markings as the cube, but much larger. Sloppier. Like it had been carved in haste, or rage, or pain. And beneath it, scratched in deep gouges through the drywall, 3 words. We see you. The words gouged into the wall, asterisk asterisk we see you asterisk asterisk, were still fresh. Bits of drywall curled outward, jagged and powdery, as if clawed by something that didn't use fingers in the human sense. Sarah stood there, flashlight beam trained on the text, heart thudding like war drums inside her chest. James said nothing. Laura backed up a step, bumping into Derek, who muttered a soft curse under his breath. No one wanted to touch the wall. It felt sacred in the worst possible way. Like a warning from something ancient that never forgot. The rest of the lab was no better. Equipment was fried, computers frozen, lights flickering weakly from their emergency backups. The security system was dead. The footage from the lab cameras, however, was still partially intact, thanks to a disconnected, battery-powered backup server Sarah had insisted on months ago, ironically, for fear of raccoons chewing through wires. She and James pulled the hard drive into the main lab, plugging it into an emergency laptop powered by a solar-charged inverter. The screen buzzed to life, sluggish, showing a timeline of archived motion detections. They skipped ahead to earlier that day. The exact window between their departure and return, 6:32 a.m. to 2:58 p.m. At first, nothing unusual. Then at 11:44 a.m., motion was detected in the main hallway. The camera feed began to play. They watched in silence as something tall moved through the corridor, just out of focus, as though the lens couldn't quite commit to capturing it. A shimmer of reality unspooling. Long limbs, bent backwards at the knees, dragged softly against the linoleum. The creature passed the break room without hesitation and paused directly in front of the quarantine chamber door. It didn't try to open it. It just stood there, watching, listening. And then, without movement, without action, the door unlatched by itself. The creature didn't touch it. The lock simply disengaged and opened as if invited. Sarah gripped the edge of the table. It didn't break in. It was allowed. James stared at the screen, jaw clenched. Inside the chamber, the feed went dark. And then came the whispering. Through the laptop speakers, something leaked in, a cascade of sounds, like reversed breathing or wind crawling across a microphone made of bone. And threaded beneath the noise were syllables. Barely comprehensible. They hear now. The whisper broke into static, then silence. What the hell does that mean? Derek asked. They hear now. Who hears what? Laura whispered. It's not just seeing us anymore. It's listening. As night fell, the group huddled in the operations room, the only part of the station that still had a functioning backup generator and locked steel door. They stacked gear against the entrance, cots, desks, anything heavy, and placed the cube in a sealed container filled with dry ice and Faraday mesh, in hopes it would shield them from whatever signals it was transmitting. But none of them could sleep. Not after the wall writing. Not after the whispers. Not after Sarah discovered something even worse. She had dug deeper into the backup camera system, scanning through older, off-site footage. One camera file was labeled incorrectly, misfiled under Test Batch from 3 weeks ago. She clicked it absent-mindedly, half thinking it was just an old test run. The feed flickered to life, showing a timestamp of 2:41 a.m., dated 18 days ago. Camera 9. She remembered that location. It had been damaged in a storm. Or so they thought. The footage showed the trail intersection by the northern ridge. Windless. Still. And then something stepped into frame. It wasn't the creature. It was a man. Or, it had the shape of a man. Pale. Gaunt. Naked, but with no defining features. Its skin looked almost translucent, veins pulsing faintly underneath like roots. It moved stiffly, glitching slightly with each step, like reality had to correct its position. And when it turned toward the camera, its face was hers. Sarah's. An exact replica. But hollow-eyed. Mouth stitched shut. A silent scream etched into its waxy face. She screamed and slammed the laptop shut. Sarah, what the hell? James grabbed her shoulders. What did you see? She couldn't speak at first. She could only point. He opened the laptop again, trembling as he rewound the clip. They all watched. No one spoke. No one blinked. When it ended, Laura quietly got up and threw up in the corner. What is this thing? Derek asked. Why does it look like her? James was shaking. It's not mimicking us. It's studying us. And now it's trying to become us. That night, the whispering returned. But it wasn't coming from speakers or devices. It was inside their heads. Not words exactly, but impressions. Thoughts that weren't their own. Sarah saw visions of twisting limbs, black roots wrapping around ancient trees, hollow caves filled with flickering symbols. She saw flashes of a place where gravity bent wrong, where time was a circle, not a line. Derek clutched his head, groaning. It's sending something. Laura fell to her knees, whispering to no one. Don't open the door. Don't let it in. James, face pale, said, I think it's trying to open a passage. We brought something back that was never meant to leave that forest. They weren't alone in the outpost anymore. Something was with them. At 3:12 a.m., all the lights died. Silence. Complete. And then, footsteps in the hallway. Slow. Uneven. Echoing. Then a knock, 3 times, on the steel door. No one moved. No one dared speak. Another knock. This time softer. More deliberate. Then, a voice. Perfectly clear. Sarah. But it wasn't coming from behind the door. It was coming from inside the room. They spun around, flashlights flaring wildly. Shadows danced across the walls like writhing tendrils. But the room was empty. Sarah backed against the wall, heart hammering in her chest. Did you all hear that?" They all nodded slowly. "It knew my name." James looked down at the container holding the cube. It was glowing faintly, pulsing. The symbols on its surface shifted and twisted as if reacting to sound. And then the hum began again. But this time, it didn't stop. Instead, it climbed. Higher, louder, piercing, until the windows began to vibrate. Until the floor itself shook. The cube snapped open. A wave of black static surged outward, flickering reality like a broken signal. Everything went white. For what felt like seconds, or hours, Sarah floated in a space between spaces. Colors she had no name for danced around her. Voices whispered truths she would never understand. And in the distance, a shape, a tower of eyes, limbs, and flickering static, watched her. And it smiled. When she woke, she was alone. The lab was empty. No James. No Laura. No Derek. The cube lay inert on the floor, split cleanly down the middle. The walls were covered now in more symbols, dozens of them. Etched in soot. In blood. You opened it. Now it sees through you. It wears your skin. Sarah ran from the station, stumbling through the forest as the sun broke over the horizon. But she didn't make it far. Because just beyond the trees, she saw something waiting for her. It was James. But he wasn't moving. He wasn't blinking. And his face wasn't quite right. And standing behind him, taller than the trees, limbs stretching endlessly into the sky, was the thing from the cameras. Watching. Breathing. Waiting. When we returned to the ranger station, the air inside felt heavier than the forest outside. There was something suffocating about the silence, like the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for us to realize what we'd done. Gabe paced in the corner, eyes darting to the window every time the wind shook a branch. Cole sat stiffly at the table, his fingers tapping out an anxious rhythm on the wood. I downloaded the last batch of footage from the cameras we'd placed deeper in the restricted zone. And when the screen lit up, our world cracked open. It wasn't just movement this time. It was there, in full view, clear as day. The creature. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. The frame showed a dense thicket near the base of a pine ridge. And then, from the shadows, something unfolded. Not walked. Not ran. Unfolded. It had long, spindly limbs that bent the wrong way, slick skin like rotting tree bark, and no distinguishable face, just a maw that gaped open far too wide. When it moved, it did so as if gravity didn't apply to it, like it chose when and how to obey the laws of the world. Gabe leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "What the hell is that?" The creature moved closer to the camera, then suddenly stopped. It tilted its head, sniffed the air, and then it looked at us. Not at the camera, at us. I could feel its attention like heat, even though I was just watching a screen. Then it did something that shattered the thin shell of logic we were clinging to. It smiled. Not a human smile. Not a grin. It was the opening of that gaping maw, slow and deliberate, revealing rows and rows of jagged glass-like teeth. The screen flickered. The creature moved forward, and the footage cut to black. Static hissed from the speakers. The footage time-stamped just 10 minutes before we retrieved the SD card. It had been that close. "It knew we were watching," Cole said, stepping away from the screen. "It knows." We sat in silence for a long time, processing what we'd seen. Then we heard it. A sharp, metallic bang outside the station, followed by a dragging sound across the porch. Gabe grabbed the rifle. I held my breath and turned off the monitor. Another thump. Closer this time. We inched toward the window. Nothing. Just the trees swaying. Then, an arm. Long, grotesque, and inhuman, reaching into view, brushing against the window frame like it was tasting the building. It retreated just as quickly. Gone in a blink. We didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Gabe was gone. We found the door open. No signs of a struggle. His bed undisturbed. The rifle gone. Just a single track of footprints leading into the woods. We called for him for hours. Radioed other outposts. Nothing. But the worst part, the tracks didn't lead far before they disappeared. Just stopped. Like something had plucked him off the earth without leaving any other mark. Cole wanted to leave. We need to get out. We've got enough footage to alert the state or the feds, someone who can handle this. I shook my head. They'll think we're insane. Or worse, they'll come and bring more people into this. Cole turned on me then, eyes wide with fear and fury. And what? You want to stay? You want to be next? I want to understand what it wants, I said. It's not killing for food. It's showing us things. Playing with us. He laughed bitterly. That's comforting. But deep down, I knew we weren't dealing with just an animal. This thing wasn't born here. It was ancient. Older than the trees. Maybe older than us. And I had a gut feeling we'd already broken some kind of law just by filming it. The day passed with no sign of Gabe. That night, I dreamed of the creature. In the dream, I was walking through the forest, camera in hand. Trees bent as I passed, their trunks covered in pulsing veins. The air stank of rot and something sweet, decay mixed with flowers. I came to a clearing where the cameras were scattered in a perfect circle around a pool of ink-black water. From that pool, it rose, taller than the trees, a mouth stretching from chin to chest. And in that mouth, faces. Familiar faces. Gabe's. My own. Even Cole's. Then I woke up to screaming. Cole. I bolted from my bed and ran outside, flashlight slicing through the night. I found him at the edge of the tree-line, panting, sweating, muttering nonsense. He pointed a trembling finger. It was whispering. From inside the trees. I couldn't see it, but it was there. I heard it. I brought him back inside, locked every door, and finally confessed something I'd been hiding since day one. I think this thing didn't just show up. I think it was buried. Contained. And when they cut down that patch of old growth last year, the one that never had any wildlife, I think they set it free. Cole stared at me, mouth open. You're saying this thing was trapped? Like, sealed away? Maybe. And the cameras? They were the invitation. We pointed eyes at it, and now it's pointing back. That night, I reviewed old logs, ranger notes, satellite maps, even indigenous records from the tribal centers nearby. There were mentions of a watcher in the roots, a being that wears the woods and comes when seen. And one phrase that chilled me to the bone. It cannot be captured. Only noticed. Once noticed, it follows. Once followed, it enters. I shut the book. I turned to tell Cole, but he was gone too. The window in his room was shattered. Blood smeared the floor in thick claw-like patterns. But no body. Just a single line scrawled into the wall with his fingernail. It's in the trees. Now I was alone. I set up every camera I had left. I pointed them at the woods, the porch, the sky. I left them rolling and sat in the center of the cabin with a flashlight and a flare gun. 4 hours. Nothing. Then, around midnight, the monitor flickered. One by one, the cameras began going dark. Not all at once. Not like a power surge. It was deliberate. Camera 1, forest path. Static. Camera 2, ranger truck. Black screen. Camera 3, front porch. Movement. It stepped into view. The same grotesque creature, but this time, it wasn't alone. Behind it, others emerged. Slightly different shapes, like variations of a template. They crept forward slowly, not like predators, but like witnesses. I stepped back from the monitor. Then, a knock on the door. Not pounding. Just 3 slow, deliberate taps. I didn't answer. Another knock. This time on the back door. Then the roof creaked. I raised the flare gun. My hands trembled. And then, the lights went out. I fired the flare into the ceiling. The red light lit the room in surreal flashes. Shadows moved, *wrongly*, across the walls. like they weren't matching anything real. Then something spoke. Not out loud. Inside my head. You looked. The cabin exploded with sound. Not noise. Asterisk voices star. All at once. Whispering, screaming, chanting my name. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears. Then, silence. When I opened my eyes, the flare had burned out. But the lights were back on. The monitors were blank. And the front door, open. Footprints in the mud led back into the forest. Mine. But I hadn't moved. Something was walking around, wearing me. And that's when I realized, this wasn't about hunting. It was about replacing. Replacing everything that dared to witness it. The final part of the story would be the worst. Because I hadn't just seen it. I had recorded it. And now, you have watched it too. And it's coming. The moment the forest swallowed us whole, I knew we wouldn't be the same after this. Our mission had begun with documentation, simple wildlife study, but what we'd uncovered in those motion-triggered frames was beyond comprehension. Now, the three of us, me, Rob, and Nora, were marching deeper into a cursed wilderness, chasing the source of something not just unnatural, but ancient and unwelcoming. The map Nora clutched trembled slightly in her gloved hand, not just from the cold, but from something more primal, fear. Its ink was old, faded, but unmistakable. The crude drawings of circles and runes lined up eerily with the clearing we'd seen in the footage. The cave. The totem pole. The impossibly tall figure with branching limbs. The last shot before the camera cut to static. We hiked in silence. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. The trees grew taller here, unnaturally so, trunks too wide, bark twisted like sinew. The smell was thick, decay, iron, moss. Each step felt like wading into the throat of a sleeping beast. At some point, Rob murmured, "Do you hear that?" We froze. At first, nothing. Then, a click. Then, another. The sound was distant, erratic, like bones tapping together or old camera shutters stuttering. Click. Click, click. Click. It came from every direction and nowhere at once. "It's mimicking," Nora whispered. "It's mimicking the trail cams." The thing had learned. It had heard the whirring, the clicking, and now it was playing it back, like bait. We moved again, faster now. But speed meant risk. The ground was covered in roots that grasped like hands. Several times, Rob tripped, once twisting his ankle so badly he cried out. "Keep going," he panted. "I'm fine." He wasn't, but none of us could afford to stop. After nearly 2 hours, we reached the clearing. It looked just like the one in the video. And it was worse in real life. The cave yawned like a wound in the earth, jagged and black. Around it stood those same statues, wooden poles carved with disturbing precision. Faces elongated, mouths sewn shut. Antlers protruding like crowns. In the center stood the totem. But it was no totem. It was a body. Dried. Twisted. Impaled upright. Its mouth was wide open in a scream. Its eyes still wet. "This is a warning," Nora said, voice tight. "We need to leave. Now." But before we could move, the air shifted. Not wind. Not cold. Something else. The clearing dimmed, though no clouds passed overhead. The world grew quieter. Click. Click, click. Behind us. Then again. In front of us. We turned in unison. And there it was. Half emerged from the cave, it looked almost like an elk, but wrong in every possible way. Its antlers twisted like blackened trees. Its skin was fleshless in places, as though it hadn't finished becoming whatever it was. Its limbs were too long. Its face. It had no face. Just a camera lens, protruding where a snout should be. It clicked once, the sound echoing around the clearing. I realized with a nauseating drop in my gut that the clicking wasn't a mimic. It was the creature. That was how it saw. And it had seen us. Rob raised his flare gun, but before he could aim, it moved. It didn't run. It didn't lunge. It glided. One moment, it was yards away. The next, it was behind Rob. Click. His scream never left his mouth. The thing touched him, barely, and Rob's body folded. Every bone cracked, limbs reversed, head twisted backward like a doll. And then silence. Nora fell to her knees, sobbing. I grabbed her arm, dragging her up. "Run," I said. "Don't look back." We didn't head for the trail. We couldn't. It would expect that. We darted through the thickest part of the forest, scraping ourselves on bark and stone, chased by the rhythmic clicking that got louder and closer. Click, click, click. Each time it clicked, I felt something inside me tremble, like it was scanning my soul. Suddenly, Nora stumbled, clutching her head. "Make it stop," she shrieked. "It's in my head." I grabbed her, holding her tight. Her eyes were rolling, blood trickling from her nose. "It's not real," I said. "Don't let it in." She trembled, and then something passed over us, an absence of sound so complete that it became a roar. When it lifted, we were alone. No more clicks. No more wind. Just stillness. We moved again. Limping. Crying. Hours later, we broke through the trees and found the ranger station. We screamed. We banged on the door. They took us in. They didn't believe a word we said. They said there was no Rob in the registration logs. No files on our cameras. No footage. Our campsite burned down weeks ago. We were listed as missing persons. And the worst part? They showed us a motion sensor image captured the same night Rob vanished. It showed Nora and I, standing alone in the clearing. No cave. No creature. Just the two of us. Smiling. But I swear to you, I don't remember that photo being taken. I don't know what it was. Maybe a forest god long forgotten. Maybe something buried here when the first people walked these woods. Something that feeds on attention. That wants to be seen. That mimics what we use to see it. That becomes part of us. Nora doesn't speak anymore. She sits in her apartment with the windows taped shut and red string covering every wall. She hasn't looked at a screen in weeks. Me. I still hike. Still set up cameras. But I stopped checking the footage. Because last week, someone mailed me an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photo. Me. Asleep. In my tent. Taken from inches away. And in the corner of the photo, just barely visible, was the tip of an antler. This forest doesn't want to be studied. Some things shouldn't be watched. And some creatures, when captured on camera, don't want to stay in the footage. They want to come out. And they're already watching you.